It was the kind of thing you can't ever really unhear, you know? That sentence, casual, clipped, and delivered with a little laugh like he was cracking a joke that just didn't land, hung in the room like a wet towel no one wanted to touch. I remember exactly where I was standing, near the corner of the dining room, between the side table with the fancy napkins Rachel folded into fans and the chair that always squeaks when you lean back too far. My knife had just cut through the first slice of carrot cake when he said it. "You're just waiting to die, Mom. That's all that's left." Everyone went quiet. The knife paused in my hand, still halfway through the frosting. I looked up at him. He was smiling, like he thought he'd said something clever, something everyone was going to laugh at in a minute. No one did. And that silence? It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I smiled too. I even laughed a little, just enough to take the edge off the tension. Then I served the cake. I looked at Ryan, and I said, "Extra big slice for you, sweetie. You've earned it." I know sarcasm's supposed to be a weapon, but it felt more like a shield in that moment. Rachel looked at me with this sort of confused half-frown, like she wasn't sure if I was actually okay or just doing my usual thing of brushing things under the rug to keep the peace. I was doing the usual thing, but not for long. You see, I'd had that moment before. Not those exact words, but that same tone. That same undercurrent of condescension from my son, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and cry when I stubbed my toe. Now he looked at me like I was a dusty old photo in a hallway he didn't walk down anymore. I remember when he was 5 and scraped his knee on the sidewalk. He screamed like his leg had come off, and I carried him all the way home barefoot. But people forget, don't they? Or maybe they just choose to forget. Either way, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled, passed out plates, and made a joke about the icing being too sweet. That night, after everyone had left and the dishes were rinsed, but not quite put away, I poured myself a glass of wine. I sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window for a long time. Rachel had texted me an hour after leaving. "You okay, Mom?" He was out of line. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Of course I wasn't okay. But I wasn't going to say it out loud because once you say it, it becomes real. And I wasn't ready for it to be real yet. So instead, I got up. I went to the hallway closet, the one where I keep the out-of-season stuff and the ugly wrapping paper no one likes, and pulled down the lockbox. The key was still taped to the back of my old sewing machine. Inside the box was a bunch of papers, some bank stuff, a couple old photos, and a letter I hadn't read in almost 10 years. It was from Nancy. My best friend since nursing school, my drinking buddy when we were both newly single, my secret keeper. She'd passed a while back, but this letter? It was like she was sitting across from me in her ragged pink robe with a cigarette in her hand and a judgmental look in her eyes. The letter reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in a long time, that I wasn't as powerless as I liked to pretend I was. Nancy always said, "Mart, you've got this sweet old lady act down cold. But underneath it, you're a goddamn lioness. Don't forget it." I had forgotten. But Ryan's words lit a fire under me. A slow, quiet fire. The papers in that box? They weren't what my kids thought I had. I'd let them believe for years that I was just scraping by on Social Security and the modest pension from the hospital. And sure, I lived like I was. Drove the same Toyota since the Clinton administration, clipped coupons, pretended I didn't know how to use online banking. But Nancy and I had a little side hustle back in the day. Rental properties. Stocks. Some smart moves, some dumb ones, but mostly smart. I had more than enough money to live comfortably. And I'd set up the trust years ago, but left it vague. Now, I was going to make it specific. And I was going to make it count. Funny how fast you can change course when someone you raised looks you in the face and says you're a ghost already. That night, I sat down at my computer. I opened up my contacts. Scrolled down to L. There she was, Lynette Jacobs, the estate lawyer who'd helped Nancy draw up her will, the one with all the bells and whistles that made sure her idiot nephew didn't get a dime. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, but I knew she'd remember me. I clicked her name and hit call. She answered on the second ring. "Hello?" I cleared my throat. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Hi, this is Martha Bennett. I need to change my will." People always assume the person who talks the loudest knows the most, and Ryan's always been the loudest person in any room he walks into, even when he didn't have a damn clue what he was talking about. He had that confidence you only really see in men who've never actually been poor, the kind of swagger that comes from never having to pick between rent and groceries. He looked at me like I was just another one of life's background characters, the frugal old lady with a slow car and faster expiration date. He had no idea what I'd built over the years, what I'd hidden away with steady hands and a quiet smile. I didn't start out clever. I started out tired, broke, and alone after his father died on a Tuesday morning in May, just 3 weeks before our 27th wedding anniversary. We had some savings, sure, but nothing you'd call a cushion, nothing soft enough to land on. So I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, switched to the night rotation so the kids wouldn't notice I was gone as much, and started stashing cash. At first, it was just $20 here and there in an envelope under my underwear drawer. But then Nancy got me into real estate, small places, cheap places, nothing fancy. A rundown duplex in Harrisburg, a one-bedroom with mold in Allentown, a basement-level condo in Erie. We fixed them up on weekends. I learned to paint, to patch drywall, to change locks with a butter knife and a screwdriver. We made money, real money. But I never told Ryan or Rachel. Why would I? The whole world tells you that you owe your kids everything. But here's what they don't say. Sometimes giving them everything just means they learn to give you nothing back. So I let them believe the story they wanted. That I was struggling. That I needed help. That I was grateful for every Christmas sweater and grocery store candle Ryan's wife mailed me with the receipt still inside the box. It was easier that way. Safer. If they knew the truth, they'd act like it was theirs. Like I owed them dividends just for being born. That morning after the birthday party, I met with Lynette, my lawyer, in a little office above a coffee shop where the Wi-Fi never worked and the carpet smelled faintly like soup. She looked at me with those sharp eyes and said, "What changed, Martha?" I just smiled and said, "Everything. I'm tired of pretending I'm a widow with nothing left but cat food and funeral plans. It's time they see the real game." We drafted a new will right there at her desk, surrounded by piles of manila folders and the faint sound of someone blending iced coffee downstairs. I didn't just cut Ryan out. That would have been too easy. I rerouted everything, every stock, every deed, every rental property and investment account. I started a scholarship fund in Rachel's name. I put aside money for Charlie's college. I even gave a chunk to the animal rescue I used to volunteer at, the one Ryan made fun of for being too sentimental for someone who doesn't even own a dog. And then, for the finishing touch, I created a fund that donates yearly to a support group for adult children of narcissists. I didn't put his name on it, but anyone who knew him would get the joke. Later that week, I went over to Rachel's house, carrying a pie and a fake smile, because I needed to know how she felt about all this. I needed to be sure she wouldn't suddenly grow a greedy streak just because her name was written in ink instead of Ryan's. She was grading papers at the kitchen table, wearing glasses I hadn't seen before, cheap ones, from the pharmacy probably, and sipping coffee from a mug that had a chip in the handle. I asked her, casual as anything, "Rach, do you ever think about, family money, inheritance and all that?" She looked up and blinked, like I'd just asked her if she believed in UFOs. Then she said, "Honestly, Mom, I just want time with you. That other stuff doesn't matter to me." And the way she said it, so offhand and real, I believed her. That was when I knew I'd done the right thing. I went home that night and pulled out Nancy's old notebook where she kept all her compound interest predictions, notes scribbled in the margins next to doodles of cats and lipstick kisses from her wine glass. She used to say, "Money makes money, Mart. Just leave it alone and let it work." I remembered her saying that compound interest doubles every 7 years. So if I started with $10,000 in 1990, by 2020 I should have had around $45,000. Give or take. That number stuck in my head, though something about it didn't sit quite right. Maybe it was higher than that, but I didn't care at the time. The point was, I had enough. More than enough. 2 nights later, I was watching reruns of Judge Judy with a glass of boxed wine in hand when the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I checked it, expecting spam or a reminder for a dentist appointment I'd probably cancel anyway. But it was Ryan. Hey, Ma. Just curious, what was that lawyer's number again? You mentioned something about her the other day, and I forgot to write it down. I didn't call back. Not right away. Instead, I poured another glass of wine and let that message play one more time, just for the hell of it. And I smiled, because for the first time in a long damn time, I was holding the cards. And he didn't even know the deck had changed. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after you stop caring whether or not someone likes you, especially when that someone shares your last name and your blood, but none of your decency. After Ryan left that voicemail, I waited 3 days before doing anything about it. 3 days of early morning coffee and slow walks through the backyard, past the garden I'd planted with my husband decades ago, past the rusted swing set no one had used since Rachel's knees were skinned and Ryan was still sweet. I walked and I thought and I remembered. And then I got to work. I started with the envelopes. One was for Lynette, one was for Rachel, and the third, well, that one wasn't going anywhere. That one I was going to hide right here in the house, tucked so deep it would take a crowbar and divine inspiration to find it. Each envelope had something inside it that would shift things permanently, pieces of the puzzle only I could put together, and, even then, only if I felt like it. I'd always liked puzzles. The quiet kind that took patience and a certain level of twisted satisfaction to finish. The envelope for Lynette held a revised version of the will with a few extra flourishes, nothing illegal, just clever. The kind of clever that would confuse a greedy person and reward a careful one. It also included a notarized letter outlining the exact timeline of my mental competence, because I wasn't about to let anyone try and claim I'd lost my marbles when they realized they weren't in the will. The envelope for Rachel had something a little more delicate inside, a letter, handwritten and brutally honest, explaining what I'd done, why I'd done it, and what she needed to be ready for. It also came with a note attached in red ink that said, "Read this when you're alone. And sit down first." The third envelope, though, was the real ace. It wasn't just a letter. It held a flash drive, a copy of an old tape, and a single Polaroid photo I'd been saving for years without knowing why. I slid it into a hollow panel behind the laundry sink, inside a bag with a desiccant packet and an index card that said, "If you're looking for the truth, start with the lies." I didn't know who might find it someday or when, but I knew someone would. These things always come out, eventually. After that, I scheduled a visit to see Ryan in Austin. He sounded surprised when I called, but only for a second. "Really? You want to come down?" he said, already shifting into salesman mode. "We've got a spare room. I'll tell Melissa to get the guest towels out." He thought I was coming to make peace, to apologize, maybe to offer him some kind of inheritance in advance like I was a living ATM with cataracts and no boundaries. Let him think it. I flew out with nothing but a carry-on bag, some homemade cookies in a Tupperware container, and a USB drive tucked into my bra, just like the old nurses used to smuggle snacks during night shifts. The cookies were real. The apology was fake. When I walked into his big new house with its granite countertops and fake plants, I smiled and told him everything he wanted to hear. I told him I was proud of him, that I was lucky to have such a successful son, that I knew I'd been a little moody lately and it was probably just age catching up with me. He ate it up like it was prime rib. His wife smiled politely from the corner of the room, sipping wine and looking at me like I was a museum exhibit, still functioning, but irrelevant. When he left to take a call in his home office, I followed him in a few minutes later with a fresh cookie and a question about his computer settings. While he showed me something on his screen, I quietly slipped the USB into the side port and hit the enter key. Just a couple clicks and the file was copied over. A fake email thread, carefully constructed, with just enough typos and timestamp errors to feel real. In it, he appeared to be discussing the logistics of placing me in a care facility, one I'd never heard of, with the clear intent to sell my house and optimize her estate while she's still breathing. Cold, calculated, believable, because it was exactly what he would do, even if he hadn't done it yet. I flew home the next day. No drama. No tears. Just a tight hug and a promise to keep in touch more. Back in Pennsylvania, I pulled up my home security camera system and scanned through the night of the party. I'd almost forgotten about the backup camera I'd installed years ago, hidden behind the bookshelf in the living room, more as a joke than anything else. But as I watched the footage from that night, I saw something I hadn't noticed in the moment. After Ryan made his little speech and I served the cake, while everyone was pretending nothing had happened, he pulled Rachel aside near the hallway and said something low in her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her face changed. Her shoulders tensed. Then she turned and walked away without answering. There was more to this. Something I hadn't seen yet. But it was there. I dropped off Rachel's envelope the next day. Told her it was just some old family stuff I wanted her to have. She smiled, hugged me, and tucked it under her arm like it weighed nothing. That night, she called me. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, you did what?" It had to look real enough to scare him, but not serious enough to bring the whole family crying at my bedside like some made-for-TV melodrama. So I called Rachel first, told her I was feeling a bit off, tightness in my chest, dizzy spells, you know, the kind of thing that gets you a fast-track ride to a hospital bed without setting off full-blown alarms. She knew I was playing a card, but to her credit, she didn't ask too many questions. She just said, "I'll meet you there, okay?" And I knew that meant she was in. One call later, I was lying in a hospital room, gown tied in the back, blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm, and electrodes stuck to my chest like I was on loan from NASA. The nurses were sweet. Some of them even recognized me from back in the day when I still pulled 12-hour shifts and wore sneakers with holes in the soles because I'd rather buy groceries than new shoes. I smiled and nodded and let them fuss over me while Rachel sat quietly near the window, pretending to read a magazine. "You sure about this?" she whispered once the nurse left. "If you start this, you can't take it back." I told her I don't plan on taking anything back anymore. Least of all my dignity. Ryan flew in the next morning. He didn't call first. Didn't ask if I needed anything. Just showed up with a damn real estate agent in tow. Blonde woman, heels too high for a hospital floor, big fake smile pasted across her face like she didn't know she was walking into the middle of something sharp. I was pretending to nap when they walked in, but I cracked when I opened just in time to see her hand him a printed brochure. My house was on the cover. My house. Spacious single-story with vintage charm and significant equity potential. That's how they put it. Significant equity potential. I'd never heard greed described so politely. Rachel caught them in the hallway. I didn't hear everything, just enough to know she lit into him with the kind of fury only a younger sister can muster. Something about vultures, something about how I wasn't even cold yet, and something else about how if he thought for a second he was walking away with her childhood home, he was dumber than he looked. That last part stung him. I could hear it in his voice when he shouted back, "She's not going to live forever, Rachel. Someone has to be practical." And just like that, it all became crystal clear. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was planning for it, counting on it, hoping for it like some sick version of a windfall. The thing is, he'd already lost. He just didn't know it yet. A few days later, when the doctors confirmed I was stable, and I milked another 2 bowls of pudding out of the deal, I checked myself out. Rachel picked me up, and we drove straight to Lynette's office. The reading of the will was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Ryan was already there when we arrived, arms folded, eyes scanning the room like he was expecting a treasure map to fall out of a drawer. His wife was on her phone. Charlie, their son, sat with his earbuds in, pretending not to notice any of it. Smart kid. Lynette cleared her throat and began. "This is the last will and testament of Martha Bennett, dated and notarized. Well, the exact date doesn't matter. What matters is how fast Ryan's face changed as she read it. His smile went from smug to shaky the minute she said, 'To my daughter Rachel, I leave the primary residence, all financial assets, and full authority over the remaining trust.' He didn't even flinch when he heard the words, 'I leave,' because he assumed his name was coming next. It did, but not the way he expected. 'To my son Ryan, I leave a single item. The wooden box located on the bottom shelf of the hallway closet, marked with his name. Lynette reached under her desk and set it down in front of him. He looked at it like it might explode. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a small framed quote I'd printed on parchment paper and tucked into a cheap frame I found at the dollar store. It read, "If you're just waiting for me to die, don't be surprised when I start living instead." Beneath it was a USB drive labeled, simply, "Play me." He stared at the contents for a long moment, then turned to Lynette. "What the hell is this?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He knew. Deep down, he knew. Back home, when he finally played the USB, it was a voicemail, his own voice, slurred from a night out, ranting to a friend about how he was, just biding time until she croaks. Said he'd flipped that house faster than a foreclosure. Said I was clueless, past it, ready for the dirt. He probably didn't even remember saying it. But I kept it. I'd recorded it from my own voicemail inbox the day he left it. Maybe part of me had been planning this for longer than I wanted to admit. When the meeting ended, Ryan stood up, knocking his chair back with a clatter. He didn't say anything. Just stormed out, red in the face, wife scrambling after him. Rachel exhaled, leaned back, and said, "Well, that was something." I was gathering my purse and papers when I noticed Charlie still sitting there. He wasn't moving, just kind of staring at the floor like he was deciding something really big in his head. Then, softly, he looked up and said, "Grandma, can I stay with you a while?" There's something strangely satisfying about slipping back into a quiet life after the storm passes, like walking out into the yard after a heavy summer rain and finding everything washed clean but still humming beneath the surface. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people think revenge keeps you angry. No, I was tired, but not weak. I was settled. For the first time in years, my mornings were mine again. I got up when I pleased, read the paper at the kitchen table with the sun coming in through the sheer curtains, and listened to the birds like they were trying to tell me secrets. I stopped pretending I didn't like the sound of silence. Charlie ended up staying with me longer than expected. Weeks turned into months before anyone even talked about a return flight. His mother didn't call much, and Ryan didn't call at all. At first, I figured it was pride or maybe guilt, but after the lawsuit came through, it was clear it was pure, uncut spite. He had the nerve to try and challenge the will, like he thought calling me, incompetent, in legalese was going to undo years of planning. He had no case, no traction, and no understanding of how many steps ahead I'd been playing this game. Lynette handled it with that stone-faced professionalism only women in bad shoes and steel spines can manage. I didn't even have to attend the hearing. The court tossed the challenge in under 20 minutes. Rachel and I celebrated with greasy cheeseburgers and milkshakes that made our stomachs hurt, but felt like the best meal I'd had in years. Charlie drew a little cartoon of the judge throwing Ryan out of the courtroom, complete with a cape and gavel that shot lasers. I hung it on the fridge. I started volunteering twice a week at the library, shelving books and helping the older folks with the computers. No one knew who I was beyond my name and that I made strong coffee and had a soft spot for mystery novels. On Fridays, I took a pottery class. I wasn't very good, but I liked the mess and the clay under my nails. Sometimes, Rachel came with me, and we'd make little wonky bowls and pretend they were heirlooms. One afternoon in early spring, she found the note. She'd been planting herbs in the raised bed behind the garage, the one I used to grow tomatoes in when the kids were little and Ryan still called me Mama instead of Ma. She tugged on a stubborn root and out came a glass jar, sealed tight, with a folded piece of paper inside. She brought it in like it was a message in a bottle from the ocean. I opened it and read aloud, "Plant revenge deep, water it slow." Rachel looked at me sideways and said, "You're a damn Bond villain." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. But here's the thing, my revenge wasn't just in legal papers or voicemail recordings. I'd saved a special twist for last, one I hadn't told anyone about. A few months before all this blew up, I'd started working with a local artist, a young woman named Marcy who specialized in modern sculpture and mixed media. I gave her a little money under the table and a very specific concept for a piece she was submitting to a charity gala that supported elder care programs in the state. The piece was titled The Heir Who Waited. It featured a gilded chair bolted to a platform, empty except for a mirror angled just right so that whoever stood in front of it would see only themselves, surrounded by gold-painted hourglasses. At the base was a plaque that read, "Sometimes what you're waiting for is already gone." I'd given her an old photo of Ryan, one of those polished headshots from his LinkedIn days, and had it subtly etched into the background in a way that wasn't obvious unless you looked hard. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It premiered the same weekend his lawsuit failed. The local paper picked it up and called it a brutal meditation on entitlement and mortality. He didn't see it right away. But when he did, he lost his mind. He sent me an email, just one line, "You're insane." I didn't reply. He wasn't entirely wrong. Charlie was in the next room playing guitar, a little out of tune, but charming in that teenage way where it's clear he's trying to find himself without trying too hard. He liked staying with me. Said the house felt more real than his own home ever did. Said I listened better. I didn't have the heart to tell him I was just done talking most of the time. I didn't ask questions about what Ryan told him, and Charlie didn't offer much. But once, as we were watching some old black and white movie, he said, "I don't think Dad really sees people. I think he only sees what he can use." That's when I knew the kid was going to be okay. Then came the letter. No return address. No postmark I could read. Just a plain white envelope stuck between the credit card offers and grocery coupons. Inside, a single line. "I know what you did." No signature, no explanation. I stared at it for a long while. My hands didn't shake.